Welcome to this very first episode of the Virulent Vortex, a podcast in which we discuss infectious diseases across scales, from molecules, pathogens to populations, pandemics, and everything in between. My name is Jaap de Rode. I'm a professor of biology here at Emory University, and I'm also today's host of this show. With me today is a very special guest. Here is Lance Waller. Lance Waller is a professor of biostatistics and bioinformatics in the Rollins School of Public Health. Lance, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jaap. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So I just introduced you as a professor of biostatistics and bioinformatics. And so, what does that have to do with infectious disease?
Well, when we want to learn about infectious disease, we collect data. And when we collect data, we need to analyze the data. And when we do across scale work, like with the infectious disease across scales, it's very hard to do a controlled experiment. So we control what we can and we try to model the rest. And that's the part I like to work on.
All right. So modeling and everything. So you said across scales, and I mentioned it too. So can you talk a little bit about what it means to study infectious diseases across scales and maybe give some examples?
Yeah, maybe we could think of influenza. Mm-hmm. So if you had the flu today, and I didn't up till now, mm-hmm. there's the pathogen, the virus is in you, mm-hmm. and perhaps it's getting caught on aerosols as you're breathing the air as we talk. And as I inhale, in order to answer your question, I may inhale some of the viral particles. Mm-hmm. So at the scale of the virus, it's adhering to aerosols. The aerosols are moving through this. But at the scale of this room, you and I are closer together than you and I and the cameraman. So maybe I'm more at risk mm-hmm. than others. And then this room is on a campus. Where the infectious people on the campus is another scale of where infection might occur. And then the city, the state, so on. And you mentioned populations up to the planetary mm-hmm. level. So pandemics will spread everywhere. Epidemics will tend to be localized. So we're interested in what happens and what causes it to move from small scale to large scale, right. and what we can and we measure things at different scales.
Right. So when I hear you talk about scales, you really talk a lot about spatial scales. I'm closer to you than you are to the cameraman. We're on a campus. The campus is in the city is in a state, and so on. So, and I have been to your office, and I know you love spatial scales and you love maps. So there is a lot of beautiful maps in your office, and I asked you to bring one of your favorites. So.
And I said they're all favorites, like my children, but I brought one of my favorites. This is a map from a atlas made by Heinrich Burckhardt in, I think the date is on here, 1851. Mm-hmm. It's an unusual collection of items. There's North and South America and where the large mammals are, like bison and so on. There's elevation of which plants grow at what elevation mm-hmm. along the Andes. Austria's here for reasons I've never figured out.
Right.
Here we've got Borneo, Sumatra, Java. But then I noticed there's a line here. It's actually painted over in yellow. And in German, it says Asian fauna pointing this direction and Australian fauna mm-hmm. pointing that direction. And you're familiar with Charles Darwin and the mm-hmm. theory of evolution.
Yes.
One of Darwin's contemporaries, Alfred Russel with one L, Wallace,
yes, I love it.
Is famous for the Wallace line, mm-hmm. also a line through this archipelago, also noticing Asian animals and plants and Australian. Mm-hmm. So continental drift, the two continents were far apart. The plants and animals evolved differently. And as they moved together, there's this line in the middle. So this is the Wallace line. I thought that was very interesting. Bought a copy of the map, got it framed. Years later, looked it up. It turns out this is about 10 years older than Wallace's original paper. So this is one of my favorites for that reason.
Right, yeah, very big skills there. And I love Alfred Russel Wallace. When I teach introductory biology to my students here, I always make sure they get to know him just as they know Darwin, because he really was the co-discoverer of natural selection. Now, I love this map and I love Wallace. I had expected you to bring up a map that showed something about infectious disease.
Well, I happen to have one with me. Jon Snow, not the Game of Thrones Jon Snow.
And Jon Snow is often seen as the father of epidemiology, right?
That's right. Yeah, so, reading these papers from the 1850s, they're very modern thinking. Yeah. He's very carefully trying to understand the patterns from the data that he observed.
So I want to change topics a little bit and actually talk about the name of this podcast. This is the first episode of the Virulent Vortex. Now, virulent refers to pathogens that cause disease, whether it's bacteria, viruses, protozoans. But let's talk about a vortex. And this is really something that you have brought to us, and everyone at Emory who's ever seen you talk knows something about a vortex. So I wanted to see if you can explain that a little bit.
Oh, great. Thanks. Thanks for asking. When I first arrived at Emory about 25 years ago, I went down to the regional EPA office, Region 4, and met with some people to talk about geographic information systems and maps tracking pollution. And as we were talking about how to answer questions they might have, one of the toxicologists there, John Richardson, drew a figure on a scrap of paper that I thought really summarized this well. I asked if I could use it. I've been using it in classes ever since. In fact, if anyone in the audience listening has been in one of my classes, this is probably the one thing they remember. And if they do remember this, I win. So I happen to have brought a copy. Would you like to see it?
Yes, I love to.
This is the picture that John drew. So we start up here in the upper left with questions you want to answer.
Yeah.
That might be, how virulent is this year's strain of flu? We can think about what data we might need. We'd need samples of the viral pathogen. We'd also need to know who's sick when and how it spreads. But we don't get to see everything. We're not tracking every viral particle attaching to every things. But we might know that you had a fever and we're feeling poorly today. I had a fever and will be feeling poorly 3 days from now. So there's data we could get. How many cases are reported each week? We've lost a little bit of the detail because we've moved in a temporal and a spatial scale, but it still captures something. So there's questions we can answer. And probably the most important part is how close are the questions we did answer to the questions we want to answer.
Yeah.
And it's a vortex because we've gone in a circle. We might say, okay, well, I want to know more. I want to get closer to this. There's additional data maybe I could try to find.
Yeah.
I could work a little harder and I still won't get everything, but I can get more. And oftentimes we'll be going around this in the research world, especially in infectious disease and especially infectious disease across scales, multiple times with different types of data. So we find this to be a really helpful visualization of the concept of the scientific process, but it's bent in a circle and we'll start again.
Right.
We hope to drill down and get better and better pictures at different scales of this disease process.
Yeah. So when I hear you talk about this, there is always what you want to answer, what you can answer. How often does it happen that those two things are exactly the same?
Well, I'd say never.
Never.
Sometimes I present this in recruiting people to go to graduate school in either ecology, disease ecology, or biostatistics. And I often get the question of, how do you know when you're done?
Yeah.
And I'd say the goal is not to be finished. The goal is to know more than when you started.
Yeah. And so even if you cannot answer that question specifically, we can still curb an epidemic. We can still make sure not more people get infected, even if it is not perfect.
And we can evaluate whether some of our interventions are working well or not working at all. A lot of them are based on really good ideas. Let's deliver clean water. Let's have people not interact so closely with an infectious disease.
Yeah.
But trying to evaluate what works well and what we can communicate accurately, I think, it's a continual process. Again, the vortex of going around is really helpful. Yeah. As you know, research is never a beginning, middle, end, new project. We're always trying to learn a little bit more.
Yeah. Fantastic. That was really interesting, Lance. Thanks so much again for joining us today on this show. I hope you have enjoyed watching this show and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks for watching.